A Nintendo PlayStation. This seems like insanity, so I kind of want to watch it. This seems like a sacrilege. Hate the idea, so let's watch it. I really don't like the idea. So I made a Nintendo PlayStation by James Channel. I mean, so it's like an old Nintendo system, but then it's actually rigged to use a disc, but the disc isn't inside, it's sideways. And you use a PS2 controller? Okay.
The game in the cartridge slot?
Bruh. That's cool. Yeah. Earlier in the day.
Nintendo PlayStation is a real thing. It really exists. It was showcased at the 1991 Consumer Electronics Show right before Nintendo very publicly kicked Sony to the curb. As a result, there's only one working Nintendo PlayStation in the world, and last time it sold, it went for more than my house.
Oh, so it is a real thing. Interesting. Interesting.
So I don't think I'm going to be owning that one, but it did give me an idea. I was given half a PlayStation a few years ago. It spent the whole time in my toolbox with tools being thrown on it all the time. And I still have the Japanese SNES shell from my portable Super Nintendo video. So I just gotta sort of just put them together, right? And then it'll be a Nintendo PlayStation. I suspect this capacitor might be bad. Solder in the new one. Fix some broken solder joints I found. The only capacitor I had was too big and the wrong value, but I reckon it'll work. There's a slight issue in that I don't have any way to put games in, but surprisingly you can still get drives off the internet. They're pretty cheap and nasty though, definitely not made by Sony. And the disc touches the plastic. I really am happy that I now have ring scratches on my Moto Racer disc. I'm going to test this with a less important disc. Do I need that plastic? No, apparently I need that plastic. Why do new things all have to be junk? I appreciate that these are still being made, but it ruined my disc and it still doesn't work.
But like, so I first had the fat PS2, then later on it died, and I got like a slim PS2, and the slim PS2 had a problem where like the, you know, like putting the disc in would not always be, it wouldn't always be like aligned. So sometimes, you know, you would put it in, think it's fine, but then you would start and you would hear like terrible noise as it was basically a little bit inclined this way. So like a side of the disc would really like scrap against the bottom of the PS2. So many of my discs were scratched. Surprisingly though, it never really caused problem. But that was the thing with like the slim PS2 back in the mid-2000s.
Ow! Oh. That's still powered on. I've adjusted the spindle height. The disc isn't touching. If I push down the lid closed button now... there we go. Now that it's working, it's time to rip its guts out.
Alright.
Don't need that. Don't need that. Now how am I gonna get this in here? There, I don't know, somewhere. Does it fit? Not quite. I think this should go this way. Oh, it's so close to fitting.
Fair enough. Adjusting.
There we go. That fits. So the power supply will fit up the back here, but I'm not gonna be able to plug anything into the power connector, so I'm gonna relocate that. Connect some wires between the parts. Now it'll fit here quite nicely. I don't like this bit of metal under here though, so I might get rid of that. Oh, awesome, a mod chip, region free. This is the expansion connector. The last of the PlayStations didn't have this anyway, so it really doesn't need it. Yeah, heaps of space. Now, obviously this power cable is not going to reach the power supply anymore. I found this in my box of junk. It's pretty much completely the wrong thing. But if I cut off the first 5 pins, kind of jams in there, and hopefully that works. This is the Super Nintendo power switch. This is what I want to use.
My main is doing absolute madness that I have no idea it works, and I'm having shitty USB problem from probably like, you know, one tiny thing having gone wrong when I built my PC. And yet it's doing all this bullshit, cutting stuff apart, sewing stuff apart, and it's still gonna work.
PlayStation 1's over here. We don't need that, so I'm gonna get rid of it. There we go. Except this switch is actually 2 switches in one package. This one isn't, but that's okay. I have a solution. I'll make it so that this switch is always on. Cut the mains trace over here, solder some wires across the gap, then connect them to the switch. In its past life, this switch never had to switch any more than 9 volts, and I'm putting 240 volts through it. I'm sure it'll be fine. I think I should probably put the controller ports in next. It'd be really nice if this spacing's the same. You know, it's not too far off, but I think it's too far off.
Yeah.
I thought there was nothing on that piece of board. There was something on that piece of board, but it only took a few jumpers to fix it. Now, I suspect this is not going to fit well. It's so close to closing on there without cutting the case.
A little bit. A little bit.
I reckon that's good enough. Even got the gaps filled up. And once again, the cables aren't going to reach. But I just went looking and discovered that the cables I got to repair 3DO consoles have the same contact spacing. So if I cut this right here, it might peel. That should work. Now it's going to be a bit difficult to plug the AV cable in here, so I flipped the motherboard over and I've plugged in the AV cable. I'm using the continuity test feature on my multimeter to figure out which solder connections I need to use, and I've just found the last one. I found this RCA panel on the back of an old TV chassis.
I frankly can't follow most of this. It's a bit advanced, but it is cool.
I just need to wire this to those 3 points I found on the motherboard plus ground. While I'm on this side of the board, I need to attach some wires for the disc cover closed switch. I could make do without it, but then I wouldn't be able to change discs on multi-disc games, and I wouldn't want to compromise the quality of the console, would I? I think it's time for some hot glue. Well, most of that dribbled back out again, but it's sitting there well enough for now. Oh look, if I break this off and put a screw in this, then only half the mains connector has to be held on with hot glue. There you go, you'd never know it wasn't factory. Installing the motherboard. Oh look, the AV ground even lines up with the motherboard ground. I can just pile a bunch of solder here for extra strength. This reset button's not going to be very useful here. I want to reuse the power light though, so I'm going to just take that out gently.
I can't believe anything is gonna work. I mean, again, I'm guessing if he knows what he's doing, it's gonna work, but the way he's just cutting, tearing, everything makes me think there's no way it's gonna survive.
Now that I've got wires for the reset switch and the power light, I can put the power supply in. Except I don't want any chance of this high voltage in here touching this board. So I'm just going to give it back its old home from the PlayStation. Hot glue, and a bit of the melty plastic trick, then a lot more hot glue. Hot glue, hot glue, hot glue, hot glue, hot glue, hot glue, hot glue. Because of the memory card slots, there isn't enough room under there for a power light, but I think if I take a bit of this plastic off and sit the power light the other way, it might just fit. I've marked where I think it should go, and some hot glue will hold it in place. I found this scrap PCB with some tactile switches on it. I'm going to try and use these to make the disc cover open switch and the reset switch work.
Okay.
This plastic part used to reach all the way through to the motherboard of the Super Nintendo where the reset button was. It's not going to work for this though. I'm hoping I can just...
It's really the kind of video that makes me feel like, you know, absolutely useless when it comes to, you know, anything involving tools and fixing stuff. Like, you know, like the only tools that we know how to use is like chainsaw and woodworker for my work when I used to work, but otherwise, yeah, like anytime I even have to use like a drill or something, you know, after I haven't used it in a while, I just forget like, you know, it works. I start doing wrong side or something. Like I'm not someone who's at all good at like any kind of like, you know, home fix and do it yourself kind of things. I'm, you know, pretty bad at any of that. So looking at stuff like this, I wish I had this kind of skill, right? Chainsaw is badass, but it's you know, basic, right? Like there isn't much complicated to it. You just power it on, your chainsaw, and then you have to, you know, the chain, you can change it. But like it's like you unscrew 2 screws and it's pretty simple, right? I just mean like having the ability to fix stuff like this because you understand how everything works, right? It's awesome. I wish I had that kind of skill, but obviously I would need the time to care about learning them.
A tactile switch in here, then cut off this shaft bit by bit until it presses that button and pops back up again. And there we go, it works. I'm going to use eject for the disc tray open button. It seems fitting. The idea is the same, but I'm going to have to take off a lot more plastic. That's not a straight cut. It's not too bad. It's a little bit low on this side, but if I drop that side down as well, it'll be okay. Except there's a slight problem. I'm pretty sure if I connect the wires from the old lid switch to the eject button, I'm going to have to hold this down the entire time the disc's in. I don't want to do that. So it's time to plug it in. I need it turned on so I can make some measurements and figure out a way around that.
Okay. It's dead. No,
yeah,
it fucking works.
Because it took a little while to turn on. There are 2 main logic voltages which most digital stuff like this seems to use. They're 3.3 volts and 5 volts. Older stuff always uses 5 volts, newer stuff tends to use 3.3. I'm fairly sure the PlayStation uses 3.3 volt logic and there's no 5 volts anywhere in here. These are the 2 wires that I connected to the back of the motherboard for the lid open switch. If I measure voltage across them, I can see that it's 3.5 volts. It's a tiny bit higher, but that's 3.3 basically. The other thing I need to find is a 3.3 volt power rail. The 3.3 volts coming out of those wires wires. It's just a signal. That's not what I need. To find the 3.3 volt rail, I need a ground first, which is easy to find because it's the traces that go to the case screws. Nothing else should ever be connected to case screws. Once I've grounded my black probe, I'm looking at these big thick traces here. I want to measure each of those until I find the one that's the voltage I'm looking for, and that's it there. So one of the chips in the PlayStation somewhere is sending out that 3.3 volt signal to the switch. When the switch closes, the signal gets connected to ground, and the chip sending it out all of a sudden loses that signal and says, wow, okay, that lid must be closed. But I want my eject button to do the opposite of that. So I'm using a resistor to pull the signal down to ground, then 3.3 volts to pull it back up again when the button's pressed. The reset button is easy, it just connects straight on, except soldering to the button melted the hot glue and I had to go chasing the button around. But where am I going to put the disk drive? Well, I think right about here is going to be good. How good is hot glue? Really works for just about everything, except for the things that it doesn't. Need to make some holes for the wiring. But once again, the wiring is way too short. These two need to reach to these two connectors hidden under here. I didn't find any helpful connectors for this one, but I found some solid core wire which pushes into there quite nicely. I'll just solder the other end to the motherboard. I'll stop the wires falling out with some hot glue. This one's going to be harder to extend though. I'm going to try and use the rest of that 3DO ribbon cable. I need to attach this onto here. Hopefully I can scrape off some of this plastic so I can solder it together. For this, I'm definitely using flux. It'll help the solder flow onto the metal. While the plastic's melting from the soldering iron. I'm actually kind of amazed by how easily this is soldering. I kind of expected the whole ribbon to disintegrate. I'm going to leave this tape wrapped around here. It's called Captain Tape. It's heat resistant and insulating. Having this ribbon cable so long and running straight over the top of the power supply has me kind of worried about interference, but it's too late now. The game in the cartridge slot.
Grand Theft Auto. Wow. Brother. How is this shit working? Like...
When it gets to this, that means it's working. Oh, the controller's not working. I really should start checking consoles properly before I build things out of them. So it turns out there's actually a fuse for the controller ports. I even used one of its solder points for the eject button. You can buy these fuses, they're really cheap. You really shouldn't leave this unfused. But I'm just gonna leave it unfused.
Okay. The first Grand Theft Auto.
This is way better than the TI-83 Plus version. Now let's see if that mod chip works. Maybe we can do some proper gaming. Looking good.
Okay. Kindle Imagine Development.
Aww, it's got no color. Some versions of the original PlayStation need an additional mod to get color on import games. Since I've already hot glued the motherboard in and stuck things all around it, I can't really get back to it to do that. Whoever put this mod chip in really just wanted to play burnt games from Australia. So I've downloaded a boot disk off the internet and hopefully that'll get us some color. It lets me force the video mode. The video's all squashed down the bottom.
Well
it's because PAL has a different number of lines to NTSC. It's not very good driving.
The Pepsi game, I've seen this game before, yeah.
The controls are backwards. Where's the cool music gone? Don't we get that during the gameplay? Oh, I'm on a skateboard. You might not have noticed that I haven't really played this before. I've owned it for a few years, and something. Now I'm playing it.
Yeah, better late than never. I mean, the great Pepsi game. Okay.
It's a totally logical result for that. I've played Pepsi Man now. It's definitely Pepsi. With the help of an emulator, I can even play Nintendo games. Although they're slightly glitchy, and I can't play Super Nintendo games.
How do you run an emulator on PS2 hardware? I don't understand how any of this work. Insanity. But amazing at the same time.
Apparently the PlayStation is not powerful enough to emulate that. So now I own a Nintendo PlayStation. It's one of a kind. Anyone want to trade it for a house? I'm a pretty serious video game collector, and on Floatplane, I post a photo of every single video game thing.
Oh, you post on Floatplane the Linus like video place.
I get. So if that sounds like something you like to see, it's only $1 a month. The link's in the description. I'll see you there.
This is an insane project. I mean, bravo. Like, absolutely bravo. This is insane. I love it. It's the kind of thing where like it just put this, together like in such an efficient, logical way. Like to me, again, like I think like a lot of people, I just live my life kind of confused about technology. Like, sure, I use my PC all the time. I even built a PC, so I understand like some of the parts that I use and stuff like that. But that's still 1,000 miles away from understanding like all the stuff he was doing, like with the chips, with what needs to be connected to what, with the cables, with the replacement, and just make everything work and not just break down. I found that insanely impressive and super interesting. Like this kind of project is just awesome. Like this is so over the top, big brain